Well, hello and welcome. I'm delighted to be joined today by Kate Nicholls, the CEO of UK Hospitality, who's going to be talking to me about Brexit and particularly about business immigration issues in the context of Brexit. Kate, welcome.
Thank you.
UK Hospitality, it's a new organisation. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the organisation and who you represent.
Yes, UK Hospitality was formed a couple of months ago. It's a merger of the ALMR and BHA, which were two of the largest trade bodies in the hospitality space. We represent over 700 companies with pubs, bars, restaurants, hotels, visitor attractions, coffee shops, and have over 70,000 outlets between them.
Now, hospitality is obviously a huge sector for the British economy, and one I don't think it's a secret to say which is quite heavily reliant on immigrant workers from the EU and from elsewhere actually. Obviously you've got a sort of unparalleled insight into your membership and what they've experienced since the referendum result took place. Anecdotally, we've heard certainly that a lot of our clients have experienced a downturn in the number of applications for jobs from migrant workers. Is that something that your members have experienced as well?
Yes, I think the first thing to say is it's not uniform across the country or across the sector as a whole, but there's no doubt that in certain parts of the country and in certain sectors there has been a significant downturn. Anecdotally, in London, in restaurants, people are reporting a 50% decline in application numbers from EU workers, although that has stabilised over recent months.
You say there's some disparity in terms of the sector. Some parts of the sector are experiencing significant problems, others perhaps less so. What are the particular types of businesses that you're seeing that are more worse affected?
Well, overall the sector has about 24% of workers will be foreign workers. However, if you then look at certain parts of the country, London and the South East in particular, but also Scotland and heavily tourism reliant areas, they have a higher proportion of foreign workers. It can be up to about 70 to 80% in some businesses in central London. And we particularly find that it's food-led businesses, restaurants, hotel restaurants in tourism-related areas. They are the ones that are having the highest proportion of foreign workers and are reporting the highest problem in retaining and recruiting.
And is this pattern something that's continued, throughout the period that we've had since the referendum results, or was there an initial spike, if you like, immediately after the referendum, which has now softened and
I think it's gone in peaks and troughs.
Yeah.
So undoubtedly there was an initial spike after the referendum result. That had less to do with the result per se and more to do with what happened to sterling. So when the exchange rate went and the pound fell, a lot of foreign workers who had family at home and were sending money back home suddenly found that they weren't earning as much in relation to their home environment. At the same time, economies in Poland, Germany and those near Eastern European states picked up, and there were areas of work for those workers to go back home to. So we did see a trend that there were some people going straight away home, more to do with sterling. It then evened itself out, and I think that as we go through and we know what the negotiations are saying, you are getting changes happening in the workforce.
In December, we had an agreement, albeit a provisional agreement, I think it's fair to say, between the UK and the EU around the status of settled EU workers in the UK. Is your sense that that's done anything to sort of calm the situation? Has that stopped the outflow of EU workers?
Very much so. I think those who were always going to go home will have a change in their decision making and will also be looking at going home at different times. So you will always see an ebb and a flow in the inflow and outflow of foreign workers. However, that certainty and clarity that the government was able to provide did an awful lot to help. It helped employers. We'd been telling our employers within membership for about 6 to 9 months that this is where the government policy was going to end up. But without a public document that you can point to, it's very difficult to give a reassurance to a foreign worker.
Yeah, of course. Obviously that's, by the sounds of things, significantly calmed the situation down. We're now in a position where we're still waiting for the government to publish its next set of proposals on the status of workers. What would you like to see the government do next?
I think in particular we need to have that steady flow of information going through. I think having one document and then a lull means that people forget about it. The government needs to be continually communicating to workers because there are new workers coming in. They need that reassurance all the way through. We need more paperwork released. We then need confirmation. There's working group that's looking at it, so we know that it is coming, but early confirmation for those workers about what to do to apply for settled status, how much it's going to cost and when they can start to do that. will be key for the next stage. And then finally, it's about what are our long-term migration policies.
Exactly. Now on that, there's various potential scenarios that have been discussed. I mean, one possibility is that we go to a points-based system, which is what we have for non-EU workers at the moment, which certainly from what I've heard is not necessarily a particularly attractive prospect for a lot of businesses because of the additional administration. I had another suggestion the other day, which was that potentially we go for workers who don't meet the Tier 2 test, we go for a sort of 2-year temporary visa as being a possibility. What would your members like to see?
I think the worst scenario would be a points-based system. We know that under the current points-based system, about 80 to 90% of our workers don't qualify. And 80 to 90% of our roles don't qualify. So we would have a catastrophic outcome if that's what we would do. I actually think it's not sensible to look at the current tiers and use that model for EU workers. We're in a totally different ballgame in terms of the number of workers and the range of jobs that they do. I think what the government needs to be doing is tying fairer access for EU workers to a fairer trade deal. And the two are inextricably linked. If you're going to have better access to goods and services, then you have, and free trade, then you have a fairer deal on employment. And I think that's what would be sensible to look at. If we are stuck with the current tier system, then there is, of course, the other tier that's available for unskilled workers that the government has never opened up. We're nervous about that being at a capped number. We've seen what's happened when caps don't work. And we know that that would probably see hospitality at the bottom of the pile. So we would want to have, if we were in that situation, a bespoke hospitality allocation to take account of our needs and concerns. And as the Migration Advisory Committee noted, we are the second largest employer of EU migrant workers, so we need a deal that works for hospitality to keep Britain moving. I think what you also then need to look at is youth worker visas. And allowing that to be extended, so the 2-year visa that you can come in on, irrespective of what the job is and without a job, for young workers could be extended to EU workers. We know we've got levels of unemployment in the EU of up to 40%. So there is a need for young workers across Europe to find jobs, and we've got jobs for them. I think you can also expand that in terms of the length of time people can stay and the age to which a young person's visa applies.
One of the interesting anecdotes I heard, admittedly a few months ago now, from one large employer in the sector, which has experienced, and it's a hotels business, which has experienced a significant decline in the number of applications from EU workers, and particularly because the way they explained it was that they often find workers from a particular area will apply in clusters. As you can imagine, there is a desire for them to all go and work in the same hotel, for example. One of the things they've been looking at is whether there are untapped resources within the UK economy, different potential worker groups within the UK economy. So, for example, they were looking at working mothers. They were looking at potentially ex-members of the armed forces. Is that something you've heard about? Is that something you think is?
Yes, it's something that we're actively exploiting as well, and it's part of the deal that we've put to government. We know we've got a short-term labour shortage in the UK. We are at very, very low levels of unemployment, both in a youth environment, it's about 11%, but overall in short-term unemployment levels, they're low, around 3%. That's historically low, so we know it's a labour shortage, it's not a skills shortage. So we're looking at all those untapped reserves, women returners, ex-servicemen, ex-offenders, homeless, but they are not going to give us the volume that we need if we don't get a solution which works for EU workers coming in the future. What we've said to the government and what the government has said back to us is top of the priority list should be those sectors of the economy who are, through no fault of their own, heavily reliant upon foreign workers, and also who have not stopped investing in their domestic workforce and in upskilling their workforce throughout this period. And that's where hospitality ticks two of those big boxes. The other point is, as I say, this is going to be short term. We're in the fourth industrial revolution. We know there are certain jobs that are going to be lost because of robotics and AI. You can see that when you look at Sainsbury's coming out and saying they're going to reduce the headcount from 25 to 5 in their stores. Now, we are one of the few sectors of the economy that you can't replace by robots. We sell experiences. And so we're well placed to pick up when unemployment does start to increase, pick up and skill those workers. But we need the time, we need the breathing space.
You mentioned an interesting point earlier on about the sheer volume of EU workers in particular that the hospitality industry employs, but obviously there are other sectors which have high volumes as well. Are you doing anything to work cross-sector, if you like, with those other sectors?
Yes, we have a very strong food and drink sector that we're working through from farm to fork, because the challenges that we face are common throughout that chain, and we are mutually supportive there. We're also working with people like the CBI, the Federation of Small Businesses, and the retail sector, the BRC, because we can't solve this problem on our own, but we know that in the service sector economy we are uniquely affected by these decisions.
Of course. Now, from the sort of key perspective of your members, what would you say the sort of key priority should be now for the government going forward in the negotiations? We've got a summit coming up at the end of June. What should the key priority be? We
urgently need resolution on the free trade. What kind of deal are we going to have in terms of customs and VAT? That is going to cause a big blockage and a big headache for the sector. We only have a short-term food supply in this country. Everybody has got used to working in just in time. If we have a system that doesn't work from day one, we will have shortages in shops and contract catering and hospitals and schools. We know we will have a problem in a very short period of time. So the government needs to give that certainty to business now about what the transition period looks like and whether it will be status quo from day one. We are only about a year out. We do need to plan, and we have got long-term contracts to sort out. So that's the urgent priority there, and that backstop is critical to know that if all else fails, we don't fall out of the EU rules. I think secondly, after that, it is what happens for migration post 2021. The worst thing that we could possibly have is one cliff hedge pushed back just to be replaced by another one, and we are rapidly heading towards that second one.
Okay. Now, it's been widely reported it's been a tough time recently for the hospitality sector, particularly certain parts of the hospitality sector. They've had to contend with a sort of perfect storm of different issues. We've had business rates underreported, I think, but we've had the business rates hikes. We've had living wage coming in, and we've had Brexit on top of that, and that's just a few of the factors that they're having to contend with at the moment. Where would you put Brexit, in the spectrum of those different issues?
I mean, Brexit hasn't happened yet, so Brexit isn't causing any of the current woes, however, or directly causing the current woes, but it makes a bad situation worse. So the issues to do with increases in labour costs and wage costs are only exacerbated if you then go into a restriction in the supply of EU workers. Certainly what had hit the sector hard and hadn't been forecast was Brexit-fuelled price inflation. Yeah. So food price inflation went 12 percentage points above CPI, and that's suddenly at the same time as you've got costs coming on and a consumer softening of demand and a crisis caused by Brexit confusion and uncertainty means you can't put your prices up to cover that because the consumer may just stop coming out. So that's why you've got this perfect storm. You've got these two costs that government imposed, business rates and national living wage, hitting at the same time as you get a contraction in consumer confidence, a contraction in the market and the economy growing, and a contraction in the supply of workers or potential supply of workers.
Okay, thank you. Kate, thank you very much.